This is Chandler for the Grappling Conjecture. Let's talk about the PGF. It just finished and overall it was really good. Actually, I shouldn't even say overall, just it was good. I'm going to show you some of the stats and everything and we're going to go over it, but first let's talk about the format. So the team format I think is really interesting. I like that, and I really like that there's a team championship and there's also an individual championship. One of the things I really like about this format that I think maybe other shows should adopt is the shorter match time. So each match during the regular season is 6 minutes, and for the finale or the playoffs, it's 10 minutes. I like this because even when there's a match it's not really, moving too fast, it's only 6 minutes. Luckily this season, I don't really feel like there was any matches that were particularly terrible. I think even the worst matches weren't even that bad. They're just kind of like, normal. And a lot of the matches, most of the matches were actually really good. One of the other things I think they changed this season, which was really good, was the stalling calls. They had them last year and it's pretty much the same, but they're a little bit more consistent and they come more often this season. I think this is really good, and I think they also changed it so that now if you get 3 penalties, the other person gets 2 points automatically. If there's 5 penalties, you just get off the mat and the other person gets 2 points. I think this is good, but I think the way they're doing it, it's probably going to be impossible for anyone to get 5 penalties. I think they should either move it down or move down the number of penalties. So instead of 5 penalties, it'll just be 4 penalties. Or make the penalties come a little bit faster. I don't know if you can really do that. For the most part, I think the penalties this season were good. There were some times where I was like, you really need to give this person a penalty. But for the most part, it was fairly good. I think you could be a little bit more consistent with it, but I can't complain too much. It was much better than last season, and not even compared to last season. Compared to 90% of other shows, it's great. So I think this really kept the matches moving and just made things interesting. Oh, for those that don't know, what they do is when you get a penalty, they'll stop the action and they'll put one person into like a wrestling referee's position and the other person behind them. So usually this gives the person a chance to get the back, which makes things interesting. In the worst case, the person just immediately escapes and they go back to what they were doing, but at least it's, kind of some break to the boringness. So I think this really helped things out and made the whole thing more interesting. But now let's get into the stats. First, let's talk about the winners. The winner of this overall was Ryan Aiken, who I believe had 50 points. He might have had even a few more. I think this is a record for the PGF for an individual to have the most points, so that's actually really amazing. And New Hope Regeneration is the team that won, which was led by Pedro Sauer. I want to say they had 62 points, but they might have actually had a few more. But overall, they did really well. Ryan Aiken and New Hope Regeneration looked amazing overall. Pedro Sauer has a good eye for talent. He picked the right team, obviously. Other people on the team also contributed a lot. Travis Thomas had, I think, 24 points. Ernesto Rivera had 14 points. Brad Schneider had 12. Kyle Chambers had 6 and Cameron Hurd had 2 points. So they all put in, just a little bit of something in there and really helped each other win that $100,000. So congratulations to them. Now let's get into how people won. If you look here, you see about 52.1% of the matches ended in a draw, and that's because it's submission only. If you don't submit them, it just goes to a draw. Everything else was a submission, with the highest percentage going to leg locks. So 28.2% of the matches were ended by leg locks, 2.8% were ended by arm lock, and 16.9% were, I don't think there were any spine locks, so I think they're all just chokes. Here, the leg lock came out on top, and I think that's because in these kind of submission-only formats, leg locks are really an asset, especially in these short time periods. They are really the king. It's really difficult for people to pass guard and then submit someone in 6 minutes. Of course it's possible, and it did happen, but the problem with doing that is if you mess up one time, you have to start all the way over, and it probably took you about 3 minutes to get to the mount or side control in the first place. So I think lots of people just burned themselves out and burned time off the clock trying to pass guard and do everything else when a leg lock would have been easier. I think the first 2 days people didn't realize that and they ran out of time, but then later in the season people realized I'm just gonna drop back for a leg lock. If I can't pass, I'm just going to drop for a leg lock and maybe I'll get them. And then you start seeing the submission percentage move up. So that's what we had there. Let's look even deeper into specific submissions. Here, the rear naked choke is number 1 again, but it's tied this time. And this is actually part of a bigger trend I've been seeing recently. The outside heel hook is making quite a comeback. Here, the outside heel hook also had 6 finishes. This is actually surprising. A few years ago, people were saying don't even bother with it, just go for inside heel hooks. But as you see here, the outside heel hook is working really well. So there you see it there with 6. And another one very close, which also has shown a recent trend, I believe, is the ankle lock with 5 finishes. The ankle lock is right up there with the other locks. Years ago, people said, don't even bother with ankle locks. Nobody's going to tap to them at the high level, but that's not true. The ankle lock is working. I think a few of these might have been the Woj lock, as Chris Wojcik calls it. He used there, which is, I believe, like a reverse Aoki lock, which is normally called, but I'll let him call it a Woj lock. I haven't seen anybody else hit it, so he's got it. There are also lots of other interesting submissions in there. We saw some knee bars, some arm triangles, normal Aoki locks in there. We even saw a Z lock. I was really surprised, but I love the Z lock, so I was happy to see it in there. People tried almost everything, and you see here there's lots of different submissions, so it's good to see a variety of different submissions and a variety of styles working. So that's what happened submission-wise. Be sure to check this out yourself if you haven't. There's lots of finishes here, as you can see. And if you just want to see, how did people finish this ankle lock? How is the outside heel hook working? You can watch it yourself. Moving on, let's talk about takedowns. Now here we had a tie between single legs and double legs. These are usually, go back and forth. I think the single leg is usually a little bit more common, but double leg is always right there. Here they tied. The single leg had more attempts, but the double leg was a higher percentage here. There's also some other takedowns here like knee taps. You saw some snap downs, slide bys, etc. Lots of good bread and butter stuff. To be honest, the PGF probably isn't the best place to do a lot of wrestling. Oftentimes this takes a while and it really just kind of runs the clock out. If you have 2 people that like to wrestle, it can work really well because it's oftentimes easy to catch people in transitions off a takedown, but sometimes people don't want to and they'll just use this to ride the clock out, in which case you kind of waste time doing lots of takedowns. So I think some people realize this, and even someone who's good at wrestling like Paul Ardilla, who I believe won some kind of championship in college for wrestling, was pulling guard most of the time just because he realized, I need to get into the submissions as fast as possible. So that's what he did here. Because of that, you don't see too many takedowns, but as you do see, it still was an important part. People were still going for takedowns here. We're going to take a look at some of the sweeps now. Here, the sub sweep came out as number 1. By sub sweep, I mean someone goes for a submission and they end up sweeping someone. So, for example, you go for a heel hook, the person spins out and you get on top. Or you go for an arm bar and in escaping the arm bar, you end up on top. So that was the number 1 sweep. This actually is very commonly one of the highest percentage sweeps. I don't know how much people are training this, but I think this is definitely something to look into because it definitely works, as you can see here. Following that was the single leg, I believe, and also the half guard sweep. Also, ankle picks were surprisingly high, and same thing with the Kiss of the Dragon. Some of these I think were so high just because people were conceding the sweeps fairly easily because of the fact that they wanted to be on bottom. During this, there's no penalty for being on bottom or being swept. You don't lose any points or anything. So because of that, lots of people took advantage of this and they didn't fight them that hard. Lots of the ankle picks people did from the bottom, people were just kind of going with them because they wanted to be on bottom. Sometimes I felt the same way about like half guard. People were like, let me see if I can jump on an arm bar or a triangle or something while I'm being swept. And so that's why that happened. Same thing with Kiss of the Dragon. Sometimes people were just sitting down. But I still think lots of these were like good, solid sweeps. And they really helped people. Lots of times people were stuck on bottom and couldn't get anything going, and just, sweeping up kind of changed the momentum of the fight and helped people win and get that submission that they needed. On the other side, we have passes. Here, the body lock came out at number 1. I think this was generally due to Abe LaMontagne and Chris Wojcik, who were doing lots of body lock passes. Here, they're doing a lot, but actually, as you can see, it wasn't completely so high percentage. It was tried a lot, and it did work a lot, but there's lots of times it failed also. The same could be said of the Toreando pass. We got lots of Toreando passes, but it also failed a lot. But that's kind of the name of the game with Toreando, that happens. Half guard passes were also up there, as well as knee slice passes. Some people might be asking, what's the difference between a half guard pass and a knee slice pass? For half guard passes, any type of half guard pass I lump in there. Knee slice, I use these for that kind of knee slice motion that starts on the feet. So if your leg is completely trapped when you start the pass and you're on your knees, I count as a half guard. If you're standing and then go into it, I count as a knee slice. So that's a small difference. Finally, let's talk about the positions. Side control was the most achieved position, which is as you'd expect, I think, and the back was the biggest finishing position. One thing I was kind of happy about was that the mount was being used to finish. In the last probably 2 years or so, more people have been getting to mount, but they haven't been able to finish. But now we're starting to see the mount finishing position kind of increase a bit. Previously, it seemed like people kind of didn't know how to finish, and maybe about like 5 years ago, people didn't even really want to go to mount. But things are changing now, and now we're seeing the mount be used more to finish people off. Also, side control is being used too. We got some nice finishes from there. Neon Belly, still haven't seen any. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a finish from Neon Belly. We did, however, see some finishes from the saddle and also 50-50 to round it out. So that's what happened with the positions. Now let's talk about the action, one of the most important things. So here, these are all based upon 5-minute intervals. So you have subs per 5 minutes, sub attempts per 5 minutes, etc. You can see them all up there. The big one I want to talk about is the action score. So this is the total of the sweeps, passes, submissions, submission attempts, pass attempts, etc. in a 5-minute period. Here we got a 12.35. Now you might be thinking like, okay, is that good or bad? In general, I think that anything over about 5 to 10 is good, which means that in 1 minute, maybe you're getting 1 to 2 things even being attempted. Anything over 10, I think, is really, really good. Here we got 12, which is amazing. And just to give it some context of, oh, is this good or bad? ADCC 2024 had an action score of 7.33. So there you go. I don't think that's bad either, but that just tells you this PGF season was better. CJI had an action score of 9.96. People are saying that's one of the best events ever. This PGF season actually had more action. I think this is also due to the shorter times. It kind of pushes people, and people aren't getting as tired and, aren't stalling as much. So I think PGF did a really good job keeping the action going, and it's reflected in the score. Now let's look at the watchability. This is a new stat I made to kind of give you an idea of how good the match is. So this is like the action score plus a modifier for if the match ends in a submission. I always think the match is better if it ends in a submission, so this reflects that. I don't have a lot to compare it to so far, but at the end of the year, I'll try to tell you, which event had the highest watchability. I think this is probably one of the highest though. So this event had a 21.59 watchability score. We can compare that to ADCC, which had a 12.18 watchability score, and CJI had a 15.49 watchability score. Like I said, I've just done this, so I don't have an average, so I don't know which one is the best so far, but I think PGF Season 7 has to be right up there, if not the top one so far. So I think PGF did a really good job with the action. PGF Season 7 had action, submissions, names, etc. I was happy to see this roster because there's lots of people like Chris Wojcik or Marcin Marchulowicz, sorry, mispronounced that, or Paul Ardilla, who you actually don't see that often. I think they should be on more big shows, but they aren't. But we got to see them here, and even when you see them on a big show for like a super fight, it's like, I kind of want to see them more. But here we got to see them in tons of fights. So if you really want to see I want to watch some Paul Ardilla matches, you have a ton of them here. I think each day they fought on average about 3 times, and going over 5 days, that's a ton of matches. Well, actually, maybe 4 days, because not everybody made the playoffs. But there's lots of things to study here, and it was just lots of fun, things to learn, and you can kind of enjoy yourself with these. I can't wait for the documentary to come out to see kind of the behind the scenes. I don't really know what was happening. There was, unfortunately, lots of breaks, so be careful. If you're somebody who's squeamish and don't like to hear limbs breaking, be careful. But if you don't mind that and you like to see good jiu-jitsu action, check out PGF Season 7. The first 4 days are completely free on YouTube, and the final day can be found on UFC Fight Pass if you have that. So check it out. I heard that next season is going to be 155. I'm really looking forward to that. I think 155 pounders will be even more exciting and action-packed. They're much smaller. They're not going to gas out. So I'm really looking forward to that, if that's true. Anyways, if you haven't, make sure you subscribe, give me a like, and leave me any questions or comments down below. I have some more videos coming soon. But until then, see you.